Okay, we are recording. This is Vince Cerf greeting you from Reston, actually McLean, Virginia, where it's 10:34 in the morning on the 19th of July. Welcome again to our digital cooperation meeting. Mei-Lin asked me to spend a few minutes to mention a little project that I've been working on sporadically for a while now. It's to capture information about the women who have helped create the internet. Some of you are on this call, Mei-Lin, for example, and Doreen, among others. But I thought that you'd like to know that there were mothers of the internet as well as fathers of the internet, and the list has gotten pretty long. I think there must be 50 or so people who are on my list anyway. I'm sure that that's not complete at all. Some of them have been instrumental in bringing internet to their countries. So in Thailand, for example, Kanchana Kanchasut has been, I don't think I got that right, Mei-Lin. How do I say her last name? She's shaking her head. Okay. Kanchanasut, I think, is correct. But she really was an academic who took an active role in bringing internet to Thailand. But there are people who were even earlier than Kanchana. Way back in the earliest days, even prior to internet, when the ARPANET project was underway, Jake Feinler, Elizabeth Feinler, was at SRI International. She was responsible for organizing and distributing the request for comments notes that document both the ARPANET and now, of course, the internet. She also managed the domain name allocations and IP address notifications on behalf of the nascent internet at the time. Radia Perlman was instrumental in doing routing architectures for the internet in the very early days, as well as becoming quite famous for doing spanning tree algorithms for local area networks. And of course, she's gotten considerable recognition from that. Elise Garrick was at Merit, the organization that led the NSFNet program, and became one of the senior people at Cisco and also at ICANN, where she managed the IANA function for a period of time. So very much instrumental over many years in the evolution of the network. Jean Armour-Pauly was another important contributor who, if I remember right, is the one who introduced the term surfing the internet as in SURF, not CERF. And there are many more. So what I'd like to ask of you is that if there are women that you know or women that you are, and you feel you've had a significant role to play in internet's continued evolution, please send me information about yourself. What I'd like to do eventually is to create a website with some documentation and biographical information about the women who have contributed to this vast and growing system. So I thank you for that. Mei-Lin, do you have any introductory remarks before we jump into the regular agenda?
Yes. Thank you, Vint. And I really appreciate you highlighting what the women have been doing to contribute to the internet, not least of which is all the women on this call. We are looking at the next phase of how the internet is spreading, especially post-COVID. And many of the discussions today are really about how this is going to spread and the role that women can be playing. And with that, I'm going to introduce Gitanjali Shah and Doreen Bogdan, who are the first presenters, because I was invited to be part of the gender mainstreaming panel at WSIS, the World Summit on the Information Society, this year, 2021. And it turned out that it struck a chord. And I was also invited to make comments at the closing ceremony of WSIS, which ran from January to May this year. And I brought up the issue of gender mainstreaming, which is a term which is a little tricky to say, so I just call it gender trendsetters, um, as we start to think about how digital is going to move into the next phase, I think women really have to step to the fore because it's affecting families, it's affecting communities and neighborhoods, and this is something that is in the women's uh, focus of attention, and we need to speak up about how the digital home can look like something where children and elders can flourish and not look like a man cave, which is currently how the home looks today. Uh, and I don't think it's just an awkward thing that the main contributors, the majority of contributors to digital decision makers and investment have been men, and they have to use what they're familiar with and what they know. But it is time to bring women in to talk about how can children flourish, how can the elderly be part of uh, uh, families for as long as possible, how can the disabled participate as fully. So with that, Gitanjali and Doreen, please, uh, over to you. Doreen Bogdan is the Director for Development at the ITU and Director of the Development Bureau. She's the first woman elected to the ITU in 154 years.
Wow.
And so I think Doreen is truly the number one trendsetter. Doreen, over to you.
Thank you, Maylin, and thank you also for putting this on the agenda today. Of course, it's a great segue from Vince's intervention on mothers of the internet. Perhaps I can start, and of course, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Gitanjali, who will give more details about the mainstreaming piece in terms of the WSIS. But just to start in terms of context and putting some numbers out there. 48% of women have access to the internet, 55% men. In LDCs, and I think this number is one that kind of shocks me the most, only 1 in 7 women have access to the internet. Of course, there's more men online in more than 70% of countries. But on the bright side, the mobile gender gap is shrinking in some areas, including South Asia. But there's little improvement in sub-Saharan Africa. And so that's, I think, something quite alarming. And globally, I think there's 234 million fewer women using the internet than men. And I think those figures speak for the reason that we have such a challenge. And on the ITU side, we look at this issue from 3 different pillars. We look at it from the access pillar, so women not having access to the internet, the figures I just mentioned. We look at it from a skills angle, and this is particularly relevant during COVID when we saw that so many people were not connecting. And one of those big barriers was lack of digital skills. And women and girls were less likely to have the needed digital skills to be able to use the internet. So the skills piece is tremendously important. And then, of course, Maylin, when we look at fora like the WSIS, where we've had many manels, right, all male panels, it's because there were not, I think we've made lots of improvements, sufficient women in the sector. So the third pillar that we look in terms of the gender piece is representation in the sector. So what do? Well, at the ITU, we started some years ago with you, Mei-Ling, with UN Women. We started the Equals Global Partnership to really tackle these 3 pillars of access, skills, and leadership. We brought our work to Generation Equality, the forum that was held in Paris just 2 weeks ago, which was great, where we actually had world leaders come forward to make commitments about how they were going to take actions to close the digital gender gap. We have brokered some great partnerships. One up I'll mention with the Enhanced Integrated Framework. It's known as EIF, working with the International Trade Center, where we're bringing connectivity and we're bringing digital skill building to farmers, women farmers in Burundi and in Haiti and Ethiopia. And that's been in development for the past 18 months. And it's quite incredible. By bringing these tools to women working in the agriculture sector, we can actually help them create businesses to be able to support their families and their communities. And so many things like that are happening around the world. We just need to focus and actually scale. We also look at ways that we can attract girls into this space. So we have lots of workshops that we do, coding camps. We have African Girls Can Code, America's Girls Can Code. And I think most of you know, we have our Girls in ICT Day celebration that we do every year on the fourth Thursday of the fourth month. This is our 10-year anniversary, and it's been quite exciting. We've had celebrations in 170 countries, so that's been terrific. We've also started to focus on mentoring, because we get women into the tech sector and then they leave. So we have this leaky pipeline syndrome, and we never actually get them to the levels that we need them to be. So you mentioned I was the first woman in 153 years when I was elected, 54 years. And I'm 1 out of 5. We need more women to come, more women to follow, more women to step up. So we've enhanced our mentoring programs. We have a Women in Cyber program, which is super exciting. We're focusing on Africa and the Arab states, and some of you are working with us in that program. We also have a network of women where we're trying to encourage women to participate. And this goes mainly to your point about policymaking and decision making. We need women to be part of these processes. So as we prepare for next year's world conferences, the World Telecom Development Conference and our own Plenipotentiary Conference, we want women engaged. We want women to make proposals. We want them to take the microphone and to chair our sessions. So this has also been exciting. And then of course, on the WSIS front, I'm going to hand over to Gitanjali, but I just wanted to end with measurement. And I'm really happy that David is here today because he's going to talk about the measurement issue. Of course, measurement was stipulated in the roadmap. So on the connectivity baseline and on the inclusion piece of the roadmap. But measurement is so critical in this space because if you can't measure it, you're not going to move it. And so we've been tracking the access figures that I mentioned before, but also participation in our meetings. And we've even gone down to speaking time. So how much time are women speaking in our meetings and what are they speaking on? And so we really need to enhance the measurement piece, and we will, I think, be able to make a difference. So with that, thank you so much. And I want to hand over to Gitanjali to share some of the great work she's been leading on the WSIS side. Over to you, Gitanjali.
Thank you very much, Doreen, and thank you, Maylin, for organizing this important conference. Of course, Doreen has been pioneering, and she has been pioneering a lot of work within ITU and outside ITU also to mainstream, gender activities in all the work that we do. So it's really inspiring, and she has been working towards creating leadership opportunities for women in the ITU as well, and has been encouraging not only women but men to promote these activities in all their programs. So it's a huge change. It's a change. It's also a change in the work culture. So it's really great, and we're really happy to be contributing to this. So I will be talking about WSIS gender mainstreaming activities today to complement what Doreen had been saying. So I'm just sharing my screen, and Maylin, do let me know if you can see my slides. Can you see?
Not yet. Oh, here we go. Yes, it's coming up now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, WSIS is it's a UN process which was initiated in 2003, and the framework of the WSIS process is within the WSIS action lines that you see in green in the left-hand side. You see our branding is around green. So we have WSIS action lines like ICT infrastructure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's fine.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So ICT infrastructure, capacity building, and the beauty of it all is that we work with more than 32 UN agencies. to implement these different WSIS action lines. So for example, we work with WHO on e-health, on FAO agriculture. We work with Minerva, UNDP on several activities and so on. And since 2015, we've been aligning these action lines with the Sustainable Development Goals. So with the UN agencies, we created a matrix which clearly shows the linkage of the different WSIS action lines with the Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2014, member states and all the other stakeholders, looking at the achievements and the challenges that still remain in the action lines, accepted the fact that gender mainstreaming is a cross-cutting aspect of all the WSIS action lines, and we should look at all of them through that lens as well. So every year, as part of implementing the WSIS action lines, we organize a WSIS forum. So last 2 years, it's been virtual. I've seen most of you participating in the WSIS forum. And before that, it's always been physical. So we work in collaboration with ITU, sorry about that, UNCTAD, UNDP, UNESCO, and like I said, more than 32 UN agencies. And the agenda is built through an open consultative process at the request of stakeholders. So we initiated a special track on ICTs and gender mainstreaming when Doreen, me, and other stakeholders, we observed that there were not too many women on panels or on whenever we were trying to build the agenda and the program of the WSIS forum and of matters that were of importance. So we started the ICT and gender mainstreaming track, where we had several workshops with reference to gender mainstreaming. We made sure that there's 50-50 participation in the hackathon to bring in more girls participating in these matters. We also looked at issues like no manners, but that's like a cultural change. It's taking a lot of time. And we have also come up with a gender repository. So ICT in basically women in ICT repository, so that if there are people trying to form their panels, they can just go to the repository and identify the speakers they are looking for. So this was one of the solutions we came up with. So what are our objectives? Of course, objective is to mainstream and promote gender equality. And our a real advantage is that we work with stakeholders, different stakeholders. So right from civil society to the private sector to the technical community, governments, UN. So we have a whole range of community working with us. So it's a very good platform to leverage, to promote, to recognize and engage women in technology, encourage girls to pursue careers in STEM, share best practices. So we have been doing all of this in various forms at the WSIS forum, organizing sessions with women leaders, workshops, knowledge cafes, boot camps, hackathons, conducting interviews. We've had several networking events like women breakfast. So we were informed by women delegates that they don't get a chance to talk to each other and to the women mentors. So we started this at the WSIS forum. So alongside, you will see, I just listed, the range of topics that are discussed at the workshops, which were part of the gender mainstreaming track, right from women engineers to girls in STEM to COVID-19 to health and so on and so forth. We also have a photo contest every year, and we have many photographs from the ground that are submitted to us, which are also linked to gender and ICT. So I'd like to encourage all of you who are working in this area, if you want to use photos for any of your repositories or your publications or your presentations, you're most welcome to contact us and use them. So the repository that Mail-in and us and a lot of other stakeholders have been working on, it's already available online. I'll just copy the link on the chat soon. And basically the idea is to identify women speakers, basically to have training sessions and to find mentors for young girls who are looking for some opportunities in this area. We encourage all of you to please submit your name and to actually nominate other women also to sign up for this repository. For this activity, we are also looking for some business gender trendsetters who will be able to help us, promote all these different things that we spoke about today. And if you know of some trailblazers, please do let us know, and we will definitely contact them to promote all these different activities. So thank you very much. And over to you, Doreen. Mr. Windsor, over to you.
Nothing more from me. Back to end. Thank you, Gitanjali.
Well, thank you both for drawing our attention to these activities. I have a couple of questions, and Joseph Knoll had something to say as well. My question had to do with a dawning appreciation for the distinction between binary, men and women, characterizations of gender to the much more broad characterizations that seem to be coming common, at least in some parts of the world. Is that notion a part of your thinking? And if it is, how are you managing to incorporate that into the work that you're doing?
Gitanjali, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yes, just, I'm glad you brought this up, Mr. because we experienced that this year at the WSIS Forum as well, and we are sensitive about it. So all these comments will be taken into consideration, and we will implement it while forming our repository. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joseph, you have the comment on digital health, I think, and this whole question of participation skill development. Let's hear from Declan.
Yeah, thanks, Doreen and Gitanjali. For us, we've seen that all the focus on digital health and in that digital health promotion is actually breaking down the barrier for women to have access to health information. So we found up in the north of Tanzania, in the Maasai, that was really the game changer to allow women to participate in whatever activities around digital health. And that is one of the reasons why we contribute strongly to the Women in Global Health. And of course, Women in Global Health and digital health are both entry points to bring up the participation in digital. And I would suggest that we can take that up in one of the follow-ups, either directly with you, Gitanjali, or with Mai-Ling, or with whomever is interested to hear more.
Thanks so much, Joseph. Declan, you had your hand up.
Hi, just fascinating to hear this, and really just a couple of points. One is I would encourage everybody to consider the issues surrounding the data bias against women. Generally, don't need to get into it here, but it's a big story. More than a story, I think it's hugely important. I think the issue also of promoting women in decision-making at all levels is something that is vitally important and is rarely, if ever, discussed. It's generally sort of more women this, more women that, whatever, which is I'm all in favor of, but specifically women in decision-making needs to be advanced. And my final point is that there's no discussion of the vital importance, in my view, of promoting and implementing policy measures to advance the roles of women at all levels. Again, that's it. We could have a whole week discussing that, but I'll just put a full stop there, because I think it's obvious. So policy is absolutely vitally important, and there are precious few policy instruments to advance the cause of women in every area. And I don't think it would be very difficult to create addendums to advancing legislation at a country level, wherever, that include and recognize the importance of addressing women's issues, and then of course promoting specific measures. And the final point I would add then is to promote access to funding for these measures as well. And I think that's vitally important. And then my final word is on Friday I was invited to attend, not speak at, attend a meeting of the Financing for Development Community, which is a UN body or whatever. And there's about 34 panelists, but there was only one attendee, that was me. So I'm just pointing to that, and we did get into a discussion, and women in science came up, and it's something they agreed to look at. So I'll circulate a note around that. It may be of some relevance. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Declan. We're nominally out of time, but I see that Sonia has her hand up. So Sonia, let's hear from you, and then we'll go on to the next topic.
Thank you, Vint, and thank you, everyone, Doreen and Gitanjali, for all the amazing work that you're always doing at the ITU and at the global level. And WSTS is fantastic, so if you haven't participated, you should all join as you can. I wanted to mention a couple of things. So Doreen also mentioned the Equals Partnership, which is another way that many organizations can support the work of ITU and the stakeholders to advance not just women's participation, but women's roles across the entire digital development sector. So that's something that maybe Doreen and Gitanjali can also mention more, but I'm a part of it, and we're very proud of that, and we do as much as we can to expand that network. But I wanted to mention, as a follow-up to Declan's note about policy, absolutely, Declan, as we all know, unfortunately, most policy in our sector does not take a gender-responsive approach to policy making. But I wanted to tell you that we've actually, through our work and our work with our partners, we've developed not only a gender-responsive policy curriculum and process to educate and train and support policymakers around the world to integrate a gender-responsive approach to policy making. And when I say policy making, just as a general term here, we including also regulatory decision making. And we've actually been able to then work directly with many governments to do exactly that. So I can tell you that for the first time, countries like Benin now have a universal access policy that is fully gender aware. Nigeria has done some work in that area as well and has done more recently. And we've also, with the support of many and as part of the Equals Partnership work that we've done together, we've also ran workshops in different sub-regions of the Global South to work with policymakers, usually about 15 to 20 countries at a time in sub-regions on how to address these questions. And the one thing I wanted to share with you is that we've actually done these in a way that I think is quite unique, and I'm happy to share another time when we have either here in these meetings or one-on-one, however it's best, is that we don't just go through kind of a standard training process, but we actually ask policymakers to bring a policy or an instrument that they want to update, revise, and really make gender aware. And we work through the workshop into helping them redrafting or drafting from scratch a new policy that integrates a gender responsive approach to either universal access, digital development, ICT policy, spectrum policy, believe it or not, infrastructure sharing. What does infrastructure sharing have to do with gender? A lot, you would be surprised. Anyway, so more when we have more time, but always happy to share some of the work that we're doing across the different countries on some of these themes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Doreen, you had your hand up again, so please tell us what you had in mind.
Yes, thank you, Vint. I'll be very quick. So Joseph, thank you for those great comments. I agree with you that when you approach this through the health lens, lots can happen. And we've seen many exciting things through our Be Healthy, Be Mobile program. And one of those programs actually focuses on cervical cancer. So that's a great piece. We could also look through, of course, the education lens as well as the agriculture lens that I mentioned before. The point that Declan mentioned about venture capital, that's a huge issue. I think it's 2%, 2.3% or something of women-led businesses get actually the funding. So that's a huge problem. The decision-making issue is also a huge problem. So we do measure that. And I think, Vince, it's like 13% of the world's regulators are led by women, and equally 13% of the world's ICT ministries led by women. That's a big problem. And to the point about other policy measures that Sonia was just referring to as well, when we did an assessment of broadband policies, it was less than 30% of broadband policies had any mention of gender. And Sonia mentioned Nigeria. That was actually one of the better examples. So much can be done in the policy, the general policy, and of course in building the pipeline so that we eventually hit the leadership piece. Anyway, thanks for those great comments, and thanks for the opportunity to share what we're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for these very useful interventions. The next topic is smart cities and building capacity for them. And Minerva Navarro is going to speak to us from the UNDP. But before you start, Minerva, I just wanted to make an observation that the smart cities are only as smart as the information they have about themselves. And so one of the big problems is not only gathering data, but also building models of how the city is supposed to work. So the data that you gather can tell you whether it's functioning appropriately or not, and then so you can respond. So I'm very interested to hear more, Minerva, about what you can tell us on this topic.
Thank you so much, Vint. And you started us off on the right note, in fact, on the very note that we would like to underline this morning. Well, I'm in New York, so good morning to everybody. Greetings from UNDP New York. It's not just about that point, in fact, Vint, but what we're seeing is that there's nothing smart about a lot of the smart cities work that we're seeing currently, especially in a lot of the developing countries, cities in developing countries that we're working with. And that's why this forum is going to be very instructive to our work going forward. And thank you for giving attention to this topic in this cooperation, in this collaboration, because the expertise around the table will be very critical in the work ahead, especially as we support countries for recovery. So I would just like to take forward where we left off with the issues on gender. Some of the pioneers that I work with in the system when I joined first in the system were really they were in the call. There's Doreen, there's Sonia, there's Gitanjali and Maylene. And in fact, it's due to the efforts of Doreen that we had a working group in the Broadband Commission. Sonia is nodding, Sonia was very much a part of that. And it was led by Helen Clark at that time, who was the UNDP administrator at that time and the lead of the working group in the first year, and later co-chaired with UN Women. So a lot more needs to be done. And somebody raised the issue of policy. That's where changes really happen, right? And it's not easy. In fact, it's very difficult in many parts. And what we're trying also to do on my team is to raise the profile of women in leadership roles. So increase engagement of women across societies, but also support opportunities for getting them into elected posts and leaders even in community. So let me start with that, because in fact, I come from the policy side of UNDP, the internal think tank, as we call it, Policy Bureau of UNDP based here in New York. And we're seeing a lot of issues, for instance, also on legal identity, by the way, before I forget. I need to note that when it comes to gender issues, a lot of the women in many developing countries still struggling with getting a legal identity, never mind digital identity, which then leads into inequality when it comes to access and engagement and opportunities. But now let me go to this topic on smart cities. Why rethinking? Because there have been a lot of concerns raised about how we're approaching smart cities. And in fact, there's been a lot of pushback on this term itself. You will recall that in 2016, when we went into Habitat 3, which is the summit it was in Quito, we co-led the working group on smart cities. And it was probably one of the most difficult discussions that we had in the system. It was co-led by ITU, UN Habitat, and UNDP. And at that time, there was great enthusiasm for smart cities, but then also great concerns, especially in developing countries, in that the local context is missing. And as I noted in the opening, that in fact, a lot of people find nothing smart about a lot of the smart cities efforts. So let me focus on the post-COVID world, because there's a lot of urgency going on at the policy side. In the trends that we're seeing, cities have been the epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know. Most of the cases, 90%, were in cities, and that came out actually in the SG's report, and I will go to that in a bit. But these are the three key messages that I would like to underline this morning, in that COVID-19 hit cities hard, hit some cities harder than others. And we can imagine the cities that have been hit hardest were in fact in developing countries. And some of them are still facing challenges that are evolving. And we still don't know how they're going to emerge out of that, noting obviously that the vaccination inequality is very serious as we speak. But the digital technologies have been very prominent in responses from the north as well as the south, and in fact also expected to figure prominently in recovery efforts and in building back better, building forward smarter from here on. We're starting to mark the end of the response period, as we call it, and moving now into recovery phase, making sure that the recovery is aligned with the implementation of the SDGs, noting there's only 9 more years left for achieving the SDGs by 2030. So the urgency is serious, given the regress on many SDGs. Smart city investments expected to rise, and there are a lot of positive projections in this one, but market-wise, there are a lot of concerns given obviously the hit that many countries got and received because of lost revenue during the pandemic. So the need for building the capacities, especially of local governments, and working with local governments in this context is becoming urgent. And this collaboration is going to figure a great deal, I hope, in continuing efforts. So next page, please, Maylene. I have already noted that the SG has underlined the impact on cities. We were part of the team that assisted the SG in developing his report on the impact of COVID in cities. So I was one of the two from UNDP, and we work closely with all the other agencies. They're all online, and the call to action was urgent, not only because of the cases that we noted happening in cities, but not just the health humanitarian impact, obviously, but also the long-term socioeconomic impact on cities, noting that you see some figures on screen. There were 1 billion still remain living in slums or informal settlements, and you can imagine the lack of services in those areas. And in fact, the call for lockdowns and so on, confining people to their homes, experts now are saying were part, in fact, of the spread of the virus, because that locked people into homes where a lot of people live in very precarious conditions. So at the end of the day, or just this year alone, we are projecting that 150 million more will fall into extreme poverty. That's a serious regress on our SDG 1 goals and targets. And part of this challenge is that along with those who are persistently poor, we are now seeing millions who are the new poor, as we call them. People have not been poor before, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the lost jobs and livelihoods, the hit on tourism, and the pause on economic activities, we now have a lot more people falling into poverty. So the long-term socioeconomic impact, if we're going to build smart cities, need to be part and parcel of the efforts. And we are seeing that with the gaps between the cities in Europe and in North America and the cities in developing countries, the gap was also already very serious, but now even more so as the North obviously build on 5G, AI, and so on and so forth, technologies that are still out of reach to many countries and cities. So on the next page, you will see that the cities that we are confronting with at our end really have to deal with issues beyond the digital. If we have to make our cities smart, we need to address the serious issues that really deter cities and countries from going forward. Over half of the world currently urban, and even with the flight from cities that we're seeing in many countries, we project that the urban population will continue to rise, and that this, in fact, is going to be rapid still in many regions, especially Africa and Asia, especially when key services remain concentrated in cities. So the rural-urban continuum is something that we need to figure in as well in our smart city efforts. Cities host 60% of the refugees, 80% of the IDPs, and I'm raising this because these are sectors, just like with youth and women, who are often neglected in discussions of this sort. So their needs also need to be figured in, and the questions arise on who have the right to the city, who really are supposed to be the beneficiaries of cities, and so on. So cities account for 80% of global GDP, although the footprint is very, very small, but the impact as well on environment is very serious. Cities are vulnerable to climate shocks and natural disasters. We're seeing that all over the world right now, floods at one area, and drought in another, fire and so on, really affecting also not just lives, but also livelihoods and economic impact. So in the next page, you will see that this picture I'm posting here, it's not ours, it's not UNDP's. I don't have the attribution right now, but this is the image that comes into mind when we think about smart cities. And this is a picture that doesn't resonate in many developing countries and many cities that we work with at the moment. But there is great excitement. And this figure that I'm putting there is from Frost and Sullivan, and projecting that investments in smart city technologies will continue to rise. And it's riding also on the realization that digital technologies that played a role in the COVID response during the pandemic. And even developing countries and cities themselves are very excited about the prospects of bouncing back from the pandemic and building their increasingly digital urban economies and societies in a much better way. So AI, big data figure a great deal. In fact, in many cases, that's the most that we will hear from one city, although other cities can't seem to get out of the smart lighting, smart meter phase. And city governments are as they look for rebuilding better and smarter, are looking to smart technologies to do that. And this is happening at a time when we just determined that cities, local governments are facing revenue losses. The World Bank has estimated up to like 25% of revenue lost, and that's an estimate just for this year alone. And then the year-on-year knock-on impact will have to be assessed also. And this is also showing in our research here, in our surveys within our own country offices that we work with, speaking with our governments. So building local capacities. This is really the priority for us now, and this is where I think the discussion should focus on, knowing that colleagues around the table already know the details about smart cities and more than I do, in fact. So we need to build local capacities. This is in the SDGs report, one of his recommendations. And traditionally, the UN system is work with national level, and we're just starting to really beef up our efforts when it comes to working at the local level. Although we have programs that address concerns from the local to the national, but local actors need to be part of the solutions, especially those that have been really hard. So smart city responses and recovery solutions need to speak to local context. And that's where we're seeing some problems, because in fact there is a tendency to focus on cutting edge technological solutions. And sometimes because of the urgency, perhaps there's no sufficient engagement at the local level in finding out really what the needs are. And the diagnostic of the digital landscape remains a serious concern, because it's also true even for development experts from my end, where we would be requested to support, and we go in without the complete data on the locale that we're trying to work with. So a rapid diagnostic of what the landscape is necessary then to help build the roadmap that will propel a city to long-term sustainability and long-term progress. We are noting that 75% of the infrastructures that we expect to be in place by 2050, noting the rapid urbanization and more cities being built, mega cities coming up, 75% of infrastructure yet to be built. So a lot of experts are saying this is a very opportune time as cities and countries start to develop strategies, that this is the time to also integrate the digital infrastructure as part of the fundamental infrastructure for 21st century urban societies and economies. And part of that also is about making the infrastructure as inclusive, resilient, and sustainable overall for the outcomes that we envision in the 2030 agenda and the new urban agenda. So capacities also, you will recall that at the beginning of this roundtable discussions months back, we raised the question of whose capacities, right? What capacities, which capacities, and how? And what we're seeing on the ground as we're working with cities, for instance, the pictures that you see, the images that you see are my grabs of our city-to-city network portal. So these are some of the areas that we're seeing where a lot of support is being requested from around the world, the countries that we work with and cities that we work with. So there's digital transformation pillar, first of all. And you can take this every which way. There are so many ways that you can take digital transformation. And in many cases, what we are seeing is that it's really boiling down to procurement process. Just getting a quick solution off the shelf, getting it to a city, getting it to a country, and then let them run with it. If we're going to talk about real transformation, we need to talk about the impact of this technology, the technologies that really matter to the local context, and that the efforts are really tied to the priorities as defined by the cities themselves, the local, in connection with the national. So the digital transformation, yes, go ahead, please.
Minerva, I'm sorry.
I'm running out of time.
You are very far over time, and so I'm wondering.
Yes, let me stop
try
there
to
then.
wrap up. Thank you. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, then let me finish with saying that all these areas that you're seeing on the screen, these are specific areas of work that we have in UNDP. We just started a collaboration with ITU and then also with UN Habitat. There will be digital aspects to every priority that we see needs to be taken care of, addressed as we move forward. And this cooperation, it needs to work more beyond this table. So there should be more collaboration and cooperation with communities beyond the experts around this table. And that's my concluding message. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minerva. Let me draw your attention to something that I believe is not adequately catered for in this whole smart city discussion. And that's gathering information, which is not necessarily digital, but about the city and its capacities and capabilities. If you look at what happened in Germany just recently because of the floods, knowing more about the topography of the city and understanding how water would flow and what it would do to the buildings, some of which were 400 or 500 years old, were wiped away in floods that had not happened in 500 years. So you don't necessarily need digital technology, but what you do need to know is facts about the city in order to respond to various and sundry threats to its safety. So this is something we will all want to consider further, but right now we're out of time. So let's move on to the next presentation from Amy, is it Regas or Regas, and Nigel Edmeade on place. So is it Amy or Nigel who will start?
I'll start, thank you.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here today, and we appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about place. Maylin, are you going to show the slides? Or yeah, okay, perfect. So my name is Amy Regas. I'm a co-founder and the partner for programs for Place. And I will give you a brief introduction to Place and to Place Trust. And then my colleague Nigel Edmeade will do a short demonstration of Place data. And I'm really happy that we're following Minerva's presentation, because I think you'll see when you see the data that it provides some of those facts about cities that are needed. So Maylin, if you can move to the next slide. We are a spin-out of Omidyar Network. We are a nonprofit technology organization established to build and maintain data infrastructure in the public interest. And our mission is to make mapping data more open, reliable, and accessible to help improve lives, strengthen public services, and better care for the environment. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve for? We believe that mapping is a critical public good that has been co-opted by private interests in many cases. So whether you're trying to manage climate impacts, upgrade slums, document women's land rights, provide digital financial services, determine COVID-19 vaccination site locations, or develop natural disaster risk models, for example, you'll need accurate, updated, and consistent mapping data for your work. However, high-quality mapping data is not available in many parts of the world. And where it is, unequal access means it doesn't benefit people or societies fairly or equally. So similar to wealth inequality, the power and benefits of mapping data are often held in the hands of too few. So what are we trying to do? Through the creation of a geospatial data trust, we're trying to make data about the world around us available in a trusted, affordable, and accessible manner. So launched last year, Place is a membership organization with a financially sustainable club good model, and it's built upon the foundations of a data trust stewarded by an independent board of trustees. So membership is open to any organization willing to abide by our terms and conditions, which include ethical use of the data. And then our governance model aims to be legitimate, effective, and trusted. So the Board of Trustees will uphold and enforce the public interest objectives of Place, while the board oversees the operational and financial performance of the trust. You can move to the next slide, Maylin, thank you. So, our value comes from not competing with any of our members, but by building the underlying plumbing. So the data that everyone needs to provide services and improve lives. And in addition, we're creating jobs and enabling innovation through a vibrant ecosystem of data producers and data users. So in a minute, Nigel's going to give a very brief demonstration of the aerial and terrestrial imagery that we can provide as data infrastructure across many verticals. And then if you want to learn more at some point, feel free to reach out to any of us at any time, and we're happy to share more information. So over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, Amy. So Maylin, we can do this two ways. I could try and share my screen, or you could run the video. I try and share my screen, yeah? Okay. So let me share my screen. So good afternoon from London. And let me just confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, it's coming up now.
Okay, so I hope my internet is sufficiently stable to give you some context for this and the transitions through the imagery that I'm going to show you. As Amy said, we are in the business of collecting primary data, and that's imagery data for urban initially and focusing on Africa, but urban geographies in Africa. So cities are our focus in terms of where we collect the data. And this example is for Dansoman, which is in Accra. We did this last December. The intention was to test approaches to how we collect the data, how we process the data, and how we deliver that data to our membership. So what I'm going to do is just show you very briefly. We use two platforms to collect the data. One is a drone. And we're not in the business of selling drones. As Amy mentioned, we're in the business of allowing our membership to innovate around the ways they collect data. We provide drones as a means to show Pioneer partners how data can be collected. So this drone is being flown by some gentlemen from the Lands Commission in Ghana. I'm just going to run the video. Hopefully, you can see this. And it weighs about 10 pounds. It's an autonomous drone. It flies for about an hour and a half. It can fly up to 90 kilometers, and it collects 5 centimeter resolution aerial imagery. That's color imagery. The red antenna on the back is a GPS, dual frequency GPS. So it's accurately geotagging the imagery that we're collecting. It's very important to emphasize two things about the data we're collecting. One is the positional accuracy, and one is the resolution. So it really lends itself to a number of different, as Amy said, verticals. In addition, we collect street imagery. And this is an example of one of the platforms we're using again in Ghana. This is a walked street camera to collect 360 imagery. So our intention is to collect imagery as the primary data, the plumbing data, the plumbing for the decisions that people will be making decisions on in terms of the verticals. This is just one example. I'll just run through some very quickly some examples. One is showing an issue for urban planners related to waste. Again, this example is for Dansoman, and it's in the southern part of Dansoman near the coastline, a big problem with waste disposal and potentially illegal dumping of waste. Not only can we track the data and the changes to things like these waste dumps, because we'll be collecting data on a 6-monthly or annual basis, you can actually go into very fine detail and see what objects are being disposed of, whether it's plastic, whether it's hazardous materials. And we can even to the point of being able to not only locate this information geographically, but also to make measurements as to the size and potential impact of some of this waste that is being dumped. So it's this high fidelity of information that's being produced from the drones really lends itself for a lot of verticals and a lot of decision making that would be done in cities in this particular example in West Africa. Likewise, you can see from the imagery the assets, the urban infrastructure, whether it's the roads, whether it's the manhole covers, whether it's the pylons, to the point of being able to actually enumerate a lot of these objects and actually build attributes around these objects about condition, when they need to be renewed, who's responsible for it. So to the point of even seeing the pylons running north and south of this, on the sort of west of this road, the road condition, the road width. So the ability for our members to then take this imagery and then add information on top of it. That's really the intent of this. And we'll keep going. The position, as I mentioned, it's the resolution, just to show some sort of examples of the fidelity of this data. So we're able to zoom in to very fine detail to see objects on the ground. This example just showing you that you can even read text on this vehicle. You can see the flag, the Ghanaian flag on the left-hand side there. We also collect air quality data on both sensors. So both the terrestrial and the aerial platforms are collecting particulate measurements. These are WHO PM1, 2.5, and 10. So this is at street level, and the drone flies at around 122 meters above ground. So again, this recurring data collection can give, again, the urban planning department and the health practitioners a sort of a surface map of how air quality is changing over time. So we do anticipate adding other sensors to our platforms, but at this point we're just collecting air quality. But this is valuable input into sort of the health planning domain. We also, the terrestrial imagery is particularly important to give perspective to what we're seeing from above. So while we can see things from above, we don't necessarily know what those objects are. And the street imagery, these icons represented by cameras, what you're able to see is actually from that street view, the object that's been observed from above, and particularly for people building point of interest data. So let's do an inventory of hospitals, let's do an inventory of schools. The terrestrial imagery gives you the attributes that then you could build the database and start populating the information that you need for that decision-making process. And I'll just keep going on. Some examples of where members have taken our data and then used it for these verticals that we anticipate them using it for. One example is the World Bank, and they ran their machine learning algorithms against the imagery to assess building condition as a proxy for housing resilience. This supports the insurance industry. It supports planning for natural disasters, for example. So this is just one example of where others can take our data and do things with it. And we anticipate a huge number of use cases being evolving over time as this data is being delivered to our membership. And likewise, population information. The World Pop Group out of the University of Southampton here in the UK create 100-meter grid cell population estimates. What we're able to do is use this imagery to help refine those models so that while we can see objects from above from the imagery, that population model may suggest that there are more people living than there actually are, because these buildings aren't necessarily all residential. There may be commercial dwellings in there as well. So there's an opportunity to refine some of these population models, and they feed into all sorts of service provision verticals from that point. The other thing I just want to mention is we collect, we also, in addition to the imagery, we also collect a digital surface model, and this is particularly related to issues of inundation and climate change. We have a surface model which represents elevation of these objects on the ground. And again, what we can do is we can see things like the roads on this elevation model, and we can see the buildings, the reds of the higher objects and the greens of the lower objects. So again, an opportunity here to use this elevation information, which is acquired off the drone, to help with some of those climate related verticals. So that's it. I'm going to stop there, and hopefully we get you back on time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. That's really stunning. The quality of the imagery and the air quality information, etc., is very impressive, as are the applications that you have in mind. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. I sent a note in the chat. I'd like to get in touch so we can talk about that further.
Thanks.
Let's see. We are still kind of over time, but
actually, no. We've had a last-minute pullout, so we've actually got 5 more minutes on this one. So I've readjusted the agenda. I put the new timing of the agenda onto the chat so that, because I think this has been fascinating for everyone. And if anybody has questions, we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Okay. Are there any questions?
So Nigel, my name is Matt Parent, and I come from a former government background. And for a long time, I've looked at a company called Planet, formerly known as Planet Labs, who does microsatellites that get into space by SpaceX. It's co-founded, or it's funded by DFJ, the venture capital firm that also funds Elon Musk. And I'm wondering, at what scale do you anticipate your seemingly higher nears photography or imagery to provide? And like, where does your solution compare with the Planet solution of like microsats?
Well, I mean, the first thing is the focus. We understand that you can't fly a country like Ghana with drones. You'd kill yourself trying to do that. So it's focusing on urban areas. There's the aspect of cloud cover. So satellites will always be, particularly in West Africa, is prone to continuous cloud cover. In the rainy season, just coming back from Ivory Coast, constant rains. You're never going to see anything with the exception of potentially using radar. We can also deploy very quickly with these drones. I mean, that example in Accra was a couple of days to capture, process, and deliver to the cloud. So, we're timely as well. We may not be 24-hour cycles that satellites offer, but cities are, on this basis of 6 months to a year, we find we're in a sweet spot. The urban areas where, I think Minerva's mentioned it. The focus is there's a lot of activity in the urban areas. Satellites better serve the rural areas, and we could, there is a separation of that sort of natural separation in terms of the resolution, the detail that you need in the urban areas that the drones offer.
Yeah, it's Vint. I'm just thinking about continuous operation or sustained operation anyway. The business model is what in order to continue, since you'll have to keep updating the data as time goes on.
Amy?
Sure, I'll take that one. So it was very important to us to develop a sustainable business model and not be forever dependent on philanthropy, for example, because as we've all seen during COVID, right, when there's a crisis and then philanthropic and donor dollars are focused on something in particular, that could be a major problem for people who aren't working in that area. So right from the beginning, we wanted to create a sustainable financial model. And so we're proposing two different sort of sources of income. One are membership dues on a sliding scale for the members of the trust. And so, a small NGO will pay next to nothing, but if there's a commercial user like an Airbus, for example, that could use this data, they will pay a much higher membership fee. And then what we also want to do is, in terms of using the data, so anyone who's using the data in the public interest, they don't have to pay for the data. Anyone who's a member, they can just use the data. And for example, let's say they're going to, as Nigel said, improve population estimates. Well, then what we're going to require them to do is then to put that new data back into the public sphere so that it's available to everyone. However, a commercial user who's a member of the trust, they're not going to be willing to put their data always back into the public sphere. They're going to have to pay a commercial use fee. And so that's where we hope to generate, a bit of the money for this, most of the money for this financial sustainability. The membership dues, we say, is a little bit more of, it helps, but the commercial fees is where we're hoping to generate the most revenue. And what we would like to do is take out concessionary loans from the likes of DFC, and then pay that back with the membership dues and the commercial license fees that we're bringing in. And that goes to the question that I saw in the chat a little bit about this being completely open. We had two concerns about doing this in a completely open manner. One of them is, as a membership model where people are signing on to ethical use practices, we have a little bit more insight into how people are using the data, which is important. And the other element is that with this membership, people will be paying some dues that will help us with the financial sustainability.
Got it. So it's very important that there be a financial model, as you pointed out. And if you're offering a service which other people find useful from the business point of view, that's a big win. It's sort of like the Internet Society running the .org top-level domain, which generates a very handsome revenue stream for them to do good works.
Right. The idea is that the commercial users will basically subsidize the collection of this data for everyone who's using it in the public interest.
Well, to the extent that it's self-sustaining, that's in the interest of the parties who are using the information for commercial purposes too. So it looks like it fits very well together. Well, thank you for keeping us on time. We appreciate that, and thank you, May-Lin, for adjusting the schedule. Let's move on now to Dan Mapes and the spatial web. So Dan, you're on.
Thank you so much. So great to be here today. We want to share with you something we've been working on for the last 4 years, and it's not coming alive. It's called the spatial web. Let me see if I can share my presentation. Can we see this? I'm hitting the share button.
Not yet, but it takes a minute sometimes.
Okay.
By the way, Dan, is your last name pronounced Mapes or Maps?
Yeah, Mapes. M-A-P-E-S, Mapes. Although in South America, people call me Mapes.
Muppets. Well, I think if it had been maps, that would have been perfect.
Well, it's obviously a destiny project, you know. No
We're
doubt.
not seeing.
No, I'm hitting the share button, and it's showing me here that share your entire screen. Why is it not coming up? Let's see here. Share a window. How about a window?
You have to select the appropriate. That's interesting. I wonder why. What are you running on Chrome or something?
Chrome. And I'm going to present now, and then it opens it up. It says share, present your entire screen. I click on that, which I thought would do the job.
Yes, that's.
And then it's not. Oh, here we go. I think we got that time. That did it come up?
Yes, it's coming up.
Okay, good. Okay, great.
Here we go.
Can we see this slide?
Well,
Spatial web.
although there we are. Yes.
Great. Okay. So we've developed something called the spatial web, which is related to the World Wide Web, just the way the World Wide Web is related to the internet. It's another layer. And so the spatial web is a nonprofit foundation, and we're partnered with IEEE. And the spatial web protocols, which are similar to HTTP and HTML, are HSTP and HSML, Hyperspace Transaction Protocol, and the Hyperspace Modeling Language. So these are becoming IEEE standards. We've been working with Constantino and the team, and we have John Havens on our board. Many of you may know him. And so these spatial protocols are delivered by the Spatial Web Foundation, and then Versus is our commercial company, which would be kind of, to use the analogy, a little bit like WordPress on the World Wide Web. So the protocols enable the World Wide Web, but probably half the websites on the World Wide Web are built on WordPress, and so it's a developer tool that makes it easy to build websites. So we have a system called COSM, which makes it easy to build web spaces. We also have a very advanced new AI from University College London. Dr. Carl Friston is one of the leading neuroscientists in the world. And he, as many of you know, DeepMind spun out of UCL. But Dr. Carl Friston didn't take part in the actual commercial side of that company. Many of the founders of that company were his PhD students. And that then became Google DeepMind when Google bought them. But he stayed on and was developing a new kind of AI called Active Inference AI. And he's our chief scientist. And so we're deploying AI as a service throughout the spatial web. So it's an AI spatial web. And our current customers and partners are the European Union. We're working on drone management throughout the EU. The World Bank, we're working on carbon accounting at the World Bank. Many other Fortune 500 companies like Honeywell and Johnson & Johnson and others. And then our big partner is Esri and mapping, although we love what Place is doing as well. So then we do channel sales with partners like Deloitte and Accenture and a large pipeline of Fortune 500 companies. So there is a lot of interest and uptake in the technology. What's curious, though, is these things happen on 25-year periods. The first programmable computer was developed in 44, 45 to crack the German cipher. 25 years later, our dear revered Vint Cerf here was working on developing the internet in 69 and 70. Tim Berners-Lee brought out the web protocols at scale in 94 and 95. And we've been developing, bringing the spatial web to life in 2019 and 2020. 25 years exactly. It's a role on each of them. I think obviously it's a Moore's law having a big play there, and network speeds increasing. Here's a quick look at the spatial web stack. Each stack is kind of unique. You can see the TCP/IP stack in that era. It was basically our logic level was programs, our interfaces were GUI, desktop interfaces, and the data was either on your hard drive or LAN. With the web, we moved to web servers, websites, and web browsers. With the mobile web, we moved to apps, mobile touch, and cloud. And now with the spatial web, we moved to AI at the logic level, blockchains and edge technologies at the data level, because every relational database is hacked in the cloud. So blockchains are going to help us deal with hacking. Obviously, smart contracts and things like that are part of the logic now too. And then the interface has got a weird twist. Obviously, we're moving to immersive interfaces, augmented and virtual reality, but we have IoT as an interface, and that's because AIs are an active user now of the web, and they need the IoT devices and cameras and all the things that Place are doing to build the world models that the AI will be operating in. So we really have a new approach, which is build a world model, allow the AI to work with the humans to optimize activities for smart cities, smart planet. Here's kind of the similar stack that we have with the World Wide Web. We have the protocol level. There's our IEEE protocol number for the Spatial Web Foundation. We have the platform level, which would be like WordPress or whatever that people could build things on. We call that COSM. And then the actual apps, which would be like the websites, only these are web spaces. These are done by users, and that's the product level. And so what we get when we put AI together with spatial is we get networked augmented intelligence. And we call it augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence because we see it as a true partnership between the human and the AI. And Deloitte's a big partner for us. And Deloitte has had, we're now seeing the spatial web unfold, which will eliminate the boundary between digital content behind our screens and physical objects in the world that we know today. We call it spatial because digital information will now exist in the world around us, in space, integrated and inseparable from the physical world. So it's breaking out from behind our screens. This is Jay Sammet, former vice chairman of Deloitte. The impact of the spatial web will dwarf that of the internet and change how we live, work, and thrive. Obviously, the big application is smart cities. We're talking about that a lot today. But of course, smart cities are made up of many, many subsystems, as we can see here. And the problem that we've had up until now is because of the way our web structure is, most of these subsystems are silent from each other. And McKinsey, after a study of 300 different smart city projects, decided that they're kind of failing because they're not interoperable. And so the spatial web really makes them interoperable. And so you really get smart everything at that point. Smart, connected, automated, secure, smart cars, smart grid, smart city, but also linking out into smart farms and smart healthcare and other kinds of things. There's a lot of new tech that's not currently on the web, automated vehicles, robotics, machine learning, augmented virtual reality, they're included in the spatial web. So now you actually have context for what's going on in a smart city. It's not just the spatial activities, but who's allowed to do what, where, and for how long, and in what laws or authorities, this kind of thing. So it's integrating the spatial, the semantic, and the social. And then you get real-time adaptive environments. So everything's kind of aware of each other because you're really living inside almost a world game or a video game. And it helps with cracking the problems of hacking, tracking, and faking that we have with the current Web 2. We can talk about that a little bit more if we like, but this is crucial, and we can't have a smart city that's totally hacked. Here's kind of what it looks like. The old web, everything's on a screen, and the new web, it's actually embedded in the world, and we can see it with augmented reality. Again, here's go out here onto this street and fix these things. No, in the new web, it would look like this. You've got augmented reality glasses on, and everything you do is gathered and captured. So now you can manage things like drones and where they're allowed to go and when they're allowed to fly, and maybe build drone highways. You can actually integrate all the activities in the smart city into almost like an organism now. And there you can kind of see some of the layers that really have to be brought together that are now silent. So you get the smart city, smart nation, smart world. And at that point, you've really got a shot at getting control of the SDGs. Ultimately, this kind of creates something that we call the world game. And this is something that Bucky Fuller was really talking a lot about. As we're seeing with all the disasters on the planet with fires and floods and other kinds of biblical problems that are facing. Bucky said the main challenge right now is metaphysical, not just technological. How do we get humanity to educate itself swiftly enough to generate behaviors that will help us avoid extinction? And he posted the idea of the world game. And so you can't have a world game without the spatial web, without AI embedded in it. And so we get a decentralized metaverse instead of just a decentralized set of documents. So that's a quick look at some of our advisory boards. Many of them, you know, John Havens, Tom Furness, Peter Diamandis, many others from Apple and Unity and VRAR associations and other groups. So anyway, thanks a lot. And we've got David online here to answer maybe some deeper questions on how we implement it. David, would you like to chat for a second?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I'm here as technical support. I'm one of the key architects at Versus. Have a background in the Salesforce and ecosystem. Worked at a company called MuleSoft. So very familiar with infrastructure that we're going to need, you know, to pull this off, and have been working for the last 2.5 years myself, and very excited to say we just launched the IEEE working group, and we have our official roll call on Wednesday. So after 2.5 years, 3 years of development of the protocol, as well as what we call the hyperspatial modeling language, and then what we call the hyperspatial domain graph, which kind of like there's a search graph and there's a knowledge graph. We feel that there's a need for a domain graph, and I can speak to that. I don't know if we have time. I could put up
you still have 5 minutes, David. Yeah, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. Okay, great.
Well, actually, he didn't have 5 minutes, but that's all right.
Oh.
Let's go ahead.
Oh, okay. I had my timer on.
Sorry.
Sorry. I thought it was 5.
Okay, I'll just tease a couple very high level concepts. As Dan was saying, these you know, we are taking a standards first protocol first approach. So these are the 3 core standard specifications that we're working with the IEEE on: the domain graph, the transaction protocol, and the modeling language. It's really about smart infrastructure, as Dan said, collapsing context between spatial GIS data, social data, rights, rules, policies, procedures, semantic data, and file systems and databases. And we say that connecting them creates context, and we see AI being able to infer intelligence by monitoring and sensing and connecting different sensoria in real time. So just like there's the virtual domain infrastructure, we need a physical spatial domain infrastructure, but that's also hyperspatial. So defining who can create, read, update, and delete, which drones can fly into what areas, you know, what are the permissions related to that, and priorities related to that as well. Very quickly, this is the hyperspatial modeling language. This will be a hopefully two year or less, little bit less or more process to get this standardized. This is really an AI tagging and coloring language, mathematical coloring language, really to turn data streams into activity streams that have full context and resolutions of all the transactions and sensoria. And then we put this into what we call a domain graph, where we track all the transactions in their full fidelity, so that you can query in higher degrees of resolution into any edge device that's providing essentially credentials on these data streams. And finally, there's a query language. So when you query the domain graph for a transaction stream, you're querying across any different dimension, and this is all transactable. So you can express either prescriptively or restrictively what the activities that can be performed, and what are the requirements related to anything from different types of seed selections to soil pH levels to different types of carbon outputs to different types of water usage. We can now query into the graph in a very private, fully credentialed, what's known as zero knowledge, zero trust way. And the graph itself and the network itself can respond to these queries and then answer questions like, is there a food desert in this community? And when certain remediations are described hyperspatially, we can then track those remediations and determine, are they effective? And if they are effective, we can hopefully scale them at the speed of trust and as close to the speed of light as possible across the network. So that's a preview. Obviously, we're going to go much deeper over the next couple of years with the IEEE and others, but I'm happy to answer any questions now in a brief way.
It's Vint. Are all of the protocol specifications freely available?
Yes, that's, officially on, we do our first roll call with the IEEE, the Spatial Web Working Group, on Wednesday. So yes, those three specifications are all part of the Spatial Web Working Group.
Well, are they available publicly as opposed to having to join the working group?
Yes, sorry. I'm not super deep into this is my first process with the IEEE. So, but I believe it's what's known as a public imperative. And so it is a public membership, and it's not, there are no membership fees, and there are no discriminatory licensing provisions, as far as I know.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, Mei-Lin corrected me. We have 2 minutes for other questions.
Dan, I'm just going to chip in very quickly. Dan and David, thank you very much. Hugely interesting. I think your point well taken. I'd love to connect. We'd love to, from Place, talk a little bit more. I mean, one of the things downstream is how we deliver data to our members, and abiding by protocols and standards is something that we have to think about. So it would be great to be able to connect with you guys at some point.
We feel the same.
Totally. It was so great to see your presentation. A lot of incredible synergies with everything that we're seeing. So really excited about your work.
Okay, great. Well, we can connect then.
So we want to make a note of appreciation for Mei-Lin too. She's been a real supporter for what we're doing, and been very helpful.
Thank you both. This is really a striking development. I'm very interested to dive deep into the protocols and understand how they function.
We would be honored. We would be really honored. Yeah, you're one of our heroes, as you can imagine.
Thank you for that. Okay, well then let's move on to the last presentation from David Kirkpatrick, which is measurement in a digital world. So David, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Vint. And I have been really blown away by what I've seen thus far, and it sets up what I'm planning to talk about very well. But a cautionary note: I'm a journalist. I'm more a general observer of things, but I think maybe it makes sense that I'm coming at the end, because I can say that I think what we've just seen in the last two presentations in particular, but throughout this whole session, is a phase shift that is underway, which I would assert actually is really a function not just of decades of technological progress, but a change in awareness that has been dramatically altered by the pandemic, and maybe also simultaneously becoming radically altered in terms of the sense of urgency by the increasing awareness of the climate crisis. So I see all that as connected. What I do as a journalist is I organize events around a company called Techonomy that I started a decade ago, which was all about technology as a tool for progress. And some of you here have been to our events. And I'm a deep believer, and I have been for a long time, that technology is underestimated as a tool for progress. But I would just also say that is less true now than it's ever been. And in the 10 years we've been doing Techonomy, a lot of awareness has crept throughout business and policymakers, et cetera, in a way that is truly impressive and promising, and we need promise. I also just want to mention the SDGs, which we organize a lot of our programs around and have been mentioned repeatedly here. They are a gift that in 2015, all the countries of the world could have come together to actually articulate where we need to go, and we need to use them as a reference point even more. But clearly, they are being used as a reference point. So Place, the spatial web, I would assert those kinds of initiatives wouldn't have come along if we didn't have some of these sort of foundational elements like the SDGs. But, I made the mistake in something I wrote recently of talking about measurement. And so Mei-Lin has ambushed me and asked me to speak here. She's so good at that, and she is irresistible, as you all know. But I would assert we can instrument the world, and that's what we're seeing, and it is starting. We have the tools. One I missed a little bit because I had a company meeting I had to drop out for, but I don't think we've heard much talk about 5G, and I think the Internet of Things was maybe briefly mentioned, but this is a foundational development too. that's allowing us to instrument the world. And I think it makes the spatial web indispensably necessary, because the cost of identifying things is and measuring them is coming down rapidly, and the exactitude with which we can measure things is rapidly increasing. But not knowing exactly what I was going to speak after, I had a couple of other thoughts that you can say are related or not. You can ignore them as needed. But, I had mentioned to Mei Lin something about my concern that, we've had these prejudices and unspoken subtexts and discriminatory behaviors in society for time immemorial. But when we begin operating digitally with transparency, those subtexts become exposed. I think you could make that point even about what Place is going to show us about what's happening in Accra. But another good example of that is connected phone cameras and live streaming exposing police abuse. There's so many ways this change is being manifested. And then AI, which has come up repeatedly here, and I always have trouble exactly understanding how it's different from good software, but I know it learns and all that. But AI is software written by humans and is too often not human-centered, to use the terminology of the day. But measurement is allowing us to detect algorithmic bias, because if we can't measure it, we can't reduce it. And the talk about gender issues and women's role, which I really was so happy to hear talked about, and Doreen is a good friend. We wouldn't be talking about that if we weren't measuring more. And I mean, we need to, maybe we would be, but we are able to talk about it with more exactitude. So the more we measure, the more we can do. And I think that's obvious, perhaps. But Joseph Knoll made the point earlier that, and the remote digital health systems are increasing women's access to information that had been denied them. But we know that because we can measure it. Maybe you call this stuff obvious, but I also, I'm sorry that Konstantinos Karchalios isn't here, because he's a good friend and I saw him on the invitation list, and the work the IEEE is doing, I consider really indispensable, because engineers have to elevate their consciousness about the systems they're creating. And this session and this series of sessions clearly helps with that. I wrote a book about Facebook, so I constantly am painfully reminded of the consequences of engineering systems that were developed without an understanding of what they would ultimately do. Facebook does a lot of great stuff, but it causes enormous harms, which were not contemplated. And I think there's still resistance to reform there. Measurement is going to force reform. I wrote a column in Techonomy just the other day about that, measuring the reach of content on Facebook and making that public, which I believe is necessary, would force some reform, because we would see actually how Facebook works. But what Konstantin has done at IEEE to develop a whole set of programs to help engineers understand the ethical consequences of their work is so fantastic. But I want to talk in particular about one area where measurement obviously, if Vint comments, I'm going to have to get confused and try to understand what he means. But anyway, go ahead, Vint. Climate change, as I said at the beginning, is a landscape-altering reality. I mean, even where I am sitting right now in the Hudson Valley, we've had torrential rains of an unprecedented intensity in the last week and a half, like about 5 different times. I mean, it's just, there is nowhere any of us live that will not be shockingly affected, and we're only at the beginning, unfortunately. But I, as a technological optimist and a believer in the power of measurement, do think we can make much more rapid progress against climate degradation than most policymakers even and citizens realize, by measuring and remediating through that measurement our actual impact on system after system. I mean, precision agriculture is one place this will be manifested very importantly. Obviously, in the use of energy, the production of energy, the distribution of energy, we are at the very beginning, because I think 5G in particular is still so early, of an era where we will really be able to know what we're doing. And if we, as Doreen said at the beginning, you can't measure, if you can't measure it, you can't move it. And that's the era we're entering into. I had a privilege, and this sort of what I think Mei-Lin was prompted to ask me to do this, because I wrote a column about, I went to an in-person event actually 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago in Munich at the DLD conference, which is a spectacular gathering. And they had a small number in person and a lot of people online. But it really changed my thinking, because I really saw a new determination that really led to what I said at the outset, to take the learnings about rapid action that we've really all accumulated in this pandemic period, and collective action and socially conscious action, which has simultaneously emerged because of the Black Lives Matter movement and so many other things, I think, and is affecting many, many areas of our work. And we're able to take all that together and apply it to continuing challenges. And it all involves measurement and response. One company that was mentioned, that presented at this conference in Munich, is actually a Munich startup, and there's a very large number of impressive Munich startups, and many of them are, like this one, focused on very basic systems of society. And Konux, Konux, what it does, it seems so unsexy. It optimizes maintenance regimes for railroads, right? So if you want to know your rail line switches don't fail, you use their software. Or you want to keep track of where everything is in a rail network. And the CEO in his presentation there pointed out that, we can't really build that many new railroad lines in most parts of the world. So we've got to increase the usage of what we have. So they predict that rail usage is going to double globally, regardless of the inability to build new tracks. But if we increase capacity and efficiency, we can operate cleanly and safely at much more intense scale. So I think companies like that are emerging in country after country, and I'm very excited about that. So I could go on, but probably best if I don't. I'm very grateful to Mei-Lin for asking me to speak today, and to all of you for driving forward this vision. And it really is exciting to hear what you all are working on. So thank you.
Well, thank you, David. That's certainly a very inspiring perspective for all of us. And it's a challenge, too. Some of the chat, as you'll see, highlights the fact that not everyone can predict what will happen as new technologies enter into use. And it's the ingenuity of human beings that always astonishes me. You put something together and they find ways to use it that you didn't anticipate. And then you discover that the bad guys have found ways to use it that you also didn't plan on. So understanding what's going on and measurement as a part of that is clearly part of our challenge and also our great need. I made one comment in the chat, which still I worry about, and I don't know if any of the rest of you do, and that's the increasingly sophisticated and complex technologies that we weld together and then depend on feel to me as if they are not necessarily available to everyone, cost being part of the issue, infrastructure and other limitations, but also there's this potential fragility about it. I've had some personal experiences just in the last few days where I couldn't get access to something because the password wasn't working, and the consequence of that was a cascade effect. A whole series of other things didn't work either. And recovery took, about an hour of fussing around and swearing and doing other things. So I do wonder whether we should be asking ourselves, can we make these technologies that we are excited about, like the ones we heard about today, sufficiently robust, affordable, and reliable that we won't have built a house of cards, which we enjoy while it's sustainable, and then when it collapses, it's not.
Hey, Vin, could I just say one thing about that? I think that's such a critical point. I had it in my talk, but I thought it was maybe slightly orthogonal, so I would leave it out. in much talk lately in the last couple of months about this increasing possibility that China might attack Taiwan, there has been more and more discussion that if they were to do so, inevitably it would be accompanied by a massive cyber attack on pretty much every system in whatever country they considered to be their adversaries, notably the United States. So that you might think, oh, they'll attack Taiwan and they'll take it back. No, we would have a problem with our plumbing, our communications, all kinds of things. So the need to harden our systems, as you're describing, that set of vulnerabilities is true at the micro and the macro level. And we could have a very serious incipient situation if we don't take that much more seriously in the very near future.
Well, and in fact, just to reinforce this, quite apart from this question of China and Taiwan, just generally, we are more vulnerable in the United States, for example, where we're so heavily dependent on technology. We've invested heavily in it than places which have not. And ironically, the very thing which we are touting and excited about is also the thing which creates vulnerability. So figuring out how to make these things much more resilient, I think, is, if we're going to rely on it, they have to be, is an important part of engineering design.
Vint, one of the concerns we've had at the Spatial Web is what we call black box AI. A lot of AI decisions, AI is going to be a part of our lives from now on. It's going to be a big part of our lives. And what we don't want is AI making decisions and we have no understanding of how that decision was made. And so what we have is backtracing in our AI systems now. And David maybe can speak to that just a little bit deeper, but so that we can actually understand how our AIs are making the decisions they're making, and we can even correct them based over time on what's happening. Because when we're starting to do planet management at scale, AIs are going to be a big part of it. As I said, we call it networked augmented intelligence. But if we've got crazy AIs or we've got hacked databases that are feeding the AI, then we're going to have bad AI decisions. David, would you say a little bit about transparent AI?
Yeah, I think a number of people here might have heard that the European Union passed a series of laws targeting AI. And the focus of that was to make sure that we know what AIs are running, what data was used to train them, and being able to have, fairly granular understanding of what is running, why, and what decisions are being made. And so we think that it's very important to be able to, at any given point, interrogate the graph, say what AIs are running, show me the provenance of all the data sets and all the other pathways that were used to train a particular AI, be able to scrub back and forward in time, and then be able to remediate, so that if we discover, hey, there was an issue with either the model or the data, and we weren't able to reproduce the results as we thought, or the results are wildly different as it's going into scale in the world, we need to be able to query and interrogate every single place that those AIs have gone. So that's a core design element of how we've designed the underlying transaction protocol.
At the risk of sounding like Cassandra, I have to point out that this isn't just a problem with AI. I mean, there is a lot of software out there which is gigantic and complex and often unpredictable. Regardless of whether you're using machine learning and neural networks or more conventional tools, the amount of software that we are relying on a daily basis is staggering. And the likelihood that anybody can figure out how it all works is questionable. I don't know about you, but every time a web page shows up when I'm surfing, I'm thinking, wow, that's a miracle. When you think about all the stuff that had to work for that web page to actually show up on your screen. Maylin had her hand up, so Maylin, go ahead.
Yeah, I am so glad that we were able to cover so much material today. And I made a comment in the chat stream earlier about why this forum is important. This informal network at the edge of the digital frontier is being curated to bring people together who care about that we have a flourishing people and flourishing planet. And yes, everybody does care, but we've got to get the people who can actually do something about it to come together and join forces for the good of humanity and spaceship Earth. So I had my hand up because I wanted to bring one point up, which has to do with the policy making in research. The National Science Foundation in the United States helped to fund the spread of the internet. Today, one of the largest research budgets is the EU because it combines 28 countries over a 7-year period. I've just put into the chat what recently the Nobel Prize Summit had a panel about the changes that need to go on in research policy making. And I bring it to your attention because the more we can get behind something like this, the more we can actually affect the change. Imagine if the NSF had not got behind the internet. We wouldn't have the internet. And Vint, I wondered if you would say anything about this, because you were on the board of the NSF, and how possible is it for these major research funding bodies to actually take into account the kinds of changes that need to take place given the technology? The link that I gave was from results in the lab to results on the ground. And the whole point of that panel was that it's going to be multidisciplinary. It's going to have to be working with communities on the ground. And I continue to bring forward Douglas Engelbart's ideas of networked communities, because we have to test these things in networks of living labs, actual communities. We can't expect scientists in ivory towers or digital people in square towers in the middle of Silicon Valley to imagine how their technology could be used. It's not possible. We've got to test it out. Science advanced because of having scientific labs. We've now got to have digital labs, and they have to be living learning labs. Vint.
Well, two observations. First of all, of course, there were others besides NSF that promoted the internet, DARPA being the obvious initial one, but then the Department of Energy and NASA also invested in backbone networks, both of which are still in operation today. The NSFNet, interestingly enough, is not, but that was a decision that NSF made when it became clear that commercialization allowed schools to simply buy access to high-speed internet. Of course, they also promoted the Internet 2 consortium. It is, so it's not 100% clear whether we would have the internet of today with or without NSF, but I will absolutely confirm that they went way out on a limb deciding to adopt the TCP/IP protocols in 1985 at a point where there was a substantial amount of international presumption that the OSI protocol suite would be the preferred ultimate outcome. And then they made several decisions, which we don't have time for me to recount, but at certain key points in the NSFNet's history to take steps that eventually caused commercialization to be feasible. So I would point out, however, that the entire evolution of the internet was done in a way that was users first. In other words, we used the technology that we were developing. So this wasn't an ivory tower initiative at all. We used the ARPANET and its applications, and we used the internet and its applications and learned from that experience as opposed to simply speculating about it in academic papers. And I think that simply reinforces your point that if you don't use the technology you're speculating about, how would you know whether or not it works or what it might do that you hadn't anticipated? So I'm sure that I see David and Dan are nodding their heads appropriately because of that. Well, we are at the point where we could continue this discussion for a few more minutes, and I need to jump off at precisely 12:30 because I have another conference to manage. But are there any other comments that people would like to make based on this extraordinary session today?
Vint, I'll just make one comment about the technology that we were using. You saw the drone and the street camera. We're committed to open source, open component technology. And it is a challenge to get this technology into Africa. I mean, there are issues related to customs, there are issues to shipping batteries, but we envisage, and the intent of these drones is that if it breaks and fails in Africa, it can be fixed in Africa. You don't have to re-import it from Europe. So, you know, that's a future we hope, we aspire to, basically.
I absolutely agree. You know, there's another group that has the same philosophy. The Network Startup Resource Center goes in and teaches people how to build and operate pieces of internet, and they don't leave until they're pretty sure the people that they have taught can actually manage the system on their own. Dan, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No. I'm really impressed, though, when I look at the rate of growth of the internet and of the World Wide Web, and hopefully now the spatial web. I mean, you guys started with 4 computers back in '69. I think you hit 40 million computers by '93. We're at 40 billion computers today, and we're plugging in 400 billion IoT devices by the end of the decade. I think we started with 8 web pages in '93. We're at 8 billion web pages today. So I really love the way humanity grabs these things and they go exponential. I mean, I think that's one of the great discoveries that the internet uncovered was when we decentralized. Then we can go friction-free because there's no central authority to check in with, and suddenly we go exponential. And then we go exponential, we get abundance. I mean, everybody has access to the greatest library in history right now on their smartphones, and smartphones you can make them for like under $100 in volume. So it really is remarkable what happens over time with these technologies as they scale. The price comes down to almost nothing, and the availability to the total global population does explode. So I think that's really a positive thing that you guys discovered maybe by accident back in the 60s and early 70s there, that wow, when we decentralize, we unlock exponential growth, and that leads to abundance.
Well, I think, Dan, one very important point about exponential growth is that eventually it exceeds, you know, all the molecules that there are in the universe. The consequence of that is that almost all exponential curves become S-shaped curves at some point. And that suggests to me that while the feeling that we have that the information space of the World Wide Web is infinite and persistent, the fact is it's not infinite and it's not persistent. And some of that data may be lost. And so we need to be sure that we retain the data that we want, conscious of the fact that it isn't going to be preserved just by letting it sit around. It will disappear if we don't maintain that information. So we should be careful. I see Matthew has his hand up. So Matthew, please go ahead.
Hi, look, I found today very, very interesting. And forgive me for being a little bit of a gloomy Gus, but I just want to point out that while a smartphone costs less than $100, it costs, we've seen them as low as $35 in Africa and Asia. But data plans, except in places like India and China that have taken state decisions to make these things available cheaply, are unaffordable for poor people in much of the world, including in many rich countries. And I think that somehow working on the role of the public and the private sector, and how to establish global public goods and make sure that everybody has access, is going to be one of the key political processes we're involved in going forward. Because in terms of hardware and software, we can do it, but if the economics isn't going to work for most people, that's going to be what the break is on all this.
Well, I wouldn't call that gloomy, Gus, Matthew. I'd call that pragmatic and also quite important for many, many people. The technology may be there, but if it doesn't fit in the budget, it's not going to get used. So we do have to work on that.
And also reconciling with our ultimate budget, which is our Earth system state and our ability to sustain and regenerate, which is really, we should start calibrating everything around. And, our accounting systems need to basically merge with nature's accounting methodologies,
So there's a way to do that, David. Today's GDP is exactly the wrong calculation to figure out how we're doing, because it's purely additive and it doesn't take into account the negative externalities that the economists ignore. Like, what did this just do to the environment, for example? So we need to have a new calculus that pays attention exactly to that. And I would love it if we saw some serious economists introducing a new calculation of benefit to an economy by including negative elements that should be part of that GDP calculation. I have just 2 minutes left, and I actually need to go prepare for a moment on another call, so I would like to be excused. And in order to do that, it means I have to stop recording. So that means once I stop recording, you can say what it was that you didn't want to say on the record. So I'll stop the recording now. It is, whoops, hold on.